Welcome to the Biopharma Business Intelligence Unit, where symbolic integrity meets strategic clarity. At BBIU, we go beyond the headlines to decode the structural forces behind global biopharma, AI, and economic realignment. If you value precision, verification, and symbolic depth, this channel is for you. Subscribe now to access our weekly briefings, dossiers, and intelligence reports, and consider joining our institutional tier to unlock early warning systems, custom metrics, and exclusive strategic insight. You're not just listening, you're entering the future of epistemic intelligence. www.biopharmabusinessintelligenceunit.com.
ASEAN as the new factory of the world. U.S. trade leverage, China's erosion, and India's missed turn. Executive summary. The United States is accelerating a structural decoupling from China by reconfiguring its supply chains through ASEAN. Recent reciprocal trade agreements with Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam not only open U.S. markets to ASEAN agriculture and low-value manufacturing, but also symbolically weaken China's role as the regional economic anchor. While China offered liquidity and infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, its domestic financial strain and debt overhang are reducing its ability to subsidize foreign partners. India, initially seen as an alternative manufacturing hub, has shown cultural and infrastructural limitations. ASEAN thus emerges as the pragmatic pivot, feeding U.S. households with agricultural staples, clothing, U.S. consumers through textile relocation, and absorbing industries that can no longer remain in China. Key findings: agricultural integration with the U.S. market. Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand will become primary suppliers of rice, cashews, coffee, and seafood to the U.S., replacing Chinese intermediaries. Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia expand with bananas, palm oil, spices, and coconut products. Direct ASEAN-U.S. flows reduce China's role as re-export platform and contribute to inflation control in the American market. Textile and low-value manufacturing shift industries leaving China. Textiles, footwear, small appliances relocate to Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Myanmar. ASEAN gains employment and industrial growth, while the U.S. secures cheaper imports. China loses its mass employment buffer, being pushed into higher tech sectors under U.S. sanctions. India's cultural and structural limitations. Fragmented regulations, unionized labor, infrastructure bottlenecks, and protectionism undermine India's suitability as a low-cost factory. India instead excels in IT services, pharmaceuticals, and high-skilled sectors. Multinationals pivot to ASEAN for manufacturing relocation, leaving India only partially integrated. Inflation as a strategic weapon. By importing cheaper food and textiles from ASEAN, the U.S. counters domestic inflation pressures while sustaining its geopolitical decoupling from China. Inflation control is transformed into a geopolitical tool, allowing Washington to maintain popular support for tariffs against Beijing. ASEAN's dual-game countries profit from U.S. market access, dollars, contracts, while still receiving Chinese infrastructure investment. This dual balancing act increases ASEAN's leverage, but exposes it to retaliation from both powers. BBIU Opinion Economic Layer. ASEAN's integration into U.S. supply chains represents a structural reallocation of low-value manufacturing and agriculture away from China. Inflation containment in the U.S. is not incidental but deliberate. Washington uses ASEAN trade as an anti-inflationary buffer. Political layer. Cambodia's alignment with the U.S., despite historical pro-China ties, demonstrates Beijing's weakening grip. Each bilateral agreement erodes China's symbolic authority in ASEAN, reframing U.S. as both trade partner and security guarantor. Strategic layer. India's failure to replace China in manufacturing reaffirms ASEAN's role as the new factory of the world. This bifurcation, India for IT pharma, ASEAN for agriculture's manufacturing, shapes a dual-track decoupling strategy. Symbolic layer. Agriculture and textiles are not trivial. They represent food and clothing, the most direct and symbolic goods for households. By shifting these flows from China to ASEAN, the U.S. is literally feeding and dressing its population without China, a powerful narrative in domestic and global politics. Risks: China's retaliation, reduced infrastructure investment, or trade sanctions against ASEAN states that lean too far toward Washington. ASEAN's dependency, risk of over-reliance on U.S. market demand, creating vulnerability if political conditions change. India's drift. Excluded from low-value manufacturing, India may attempt aggressive protectionism or counter moves. Final integrity verdict. The United States has converted reciprocal trade agreements into an inflation control mechanism, a geopolitical lever, and a symbolic weapon against China. ASEAN gains the role of industrial buffer and agricultural supplier, while India remains a secondary player. Verdict: high strategic integrity. You've reached the end of the open section of this BBIU content. The complete analysis, with full data, structural frameworks, and extended annexes, is available exclusively to our subscribers. At BBIU, we believe the real value lies beyond headlines, in the depth of structural intelligence that helps leaders and organizations see further. If you want access to the complete archive and future reports, join us at BBIU and take part in the next level of analysis.